Hello and welcome to Within the Frame. I'm your new host, Han-daeun in Seoul. From today, I'll be succeeding Kim Bo-kyung to bring you a thorough examination and a comprehensive review of hot-button current issues in and outside of Korea. Be sure to tune in at the same time every weeknight to join our conversation with top experts. At this time of the year, the world has its eyes fixed on China, where the annual meeting of China's Parliament and Political Advisory Body, better known as the Two Sessions, take place. The big political meeting kicked off today in Beijing, bringing together thousands of delegates to discuss China's future policy directions. The stakes are high as China now faces a series of headwinds at home and abroad. For some insights into what we can expect from this year's Liang, we're joined by Xu Qinduo, a senior fellow at Pangoal Institution. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us tonight is Song Soo-young, professor of finance at Chung University's College of Business and Economics. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and good evening to you.
All right, let's start with you, Professor Xu. For our listeners who may not be so familiar, could you first give us a general overview of what two sessions are? Who takes part, what happens during the meetings, and why is it one of the most important events on China's political calendar?
Well, thank you for the question. It is a good question, obviously, for people who are not familiar with the Chinese politics. Every year at this particular time, early March, there will be two sessions. One is for the National People's Congress, or NPC, which is the Chinese legislature, to get together to discuss issues concerning the nation or make laws about the country. Ongoing will be another session organized by the CPPCC, which is the top advisory body of China. Its members are mostly experts from different areas. For example, entrepreneurs from the business community, or professors or intellectual celebrity from the intellectual community, or even those stars from entertainment or sports industries. So they represent different sectors, different walks of life, to provide advice, to provide criticism, to question probably, or to supervise the government policies or behaviors in that respect. So this is why people have the attention on the Chinese two sessions. We call them two sessions. One important thing is really about it sets the tone of the economic growth of this year in particular, and also policies on foreign affairs, on the defense, etc. As China is the second largest economy, so naturally, in another way, and people do have their attention on what's going on in Beijing now.
Right. China, of course, the world's second largest economy, so China's economy and China's policies do matter. And the meeting is usually quite lengthy, so the world will be watching closely the developments for the next week or so for some clues as to where China's major overarching policies are headed. And it appears this year's two sessions are gaining even more attention because the world is faced with a pivotal time with so many economic uncertainties and escalating geopolitical tensions. Now, staying with you, Professor Xu, last year's two sessions saw President Xi Jinping installed as the leader of China for an unprecedented third term. What will be the highlight this year? Walk us through some of the key watch points.
Well, for this year, the focus has been as usual, is a government work report prepared by the premier of the country. In that report, the premier usually will lay out the economic growth target for this year, which is expected to be around 5% for 2024. It is the same as in 2023, but of course, it will be more challenging to achieve the same target, given what happened what's happening around the world, both inside and outside China. And the second is really about, in order to achieve that kind of economic expansion, what kind of plans, what kind of measures the Chinese government is going to adopt. For example, whether there will be a massive stimulus package, or whether there will be a moderate, stimulus package to spur the economic growth. So that's the concern for a lot of investors, for a lot of people around the world, because of obviously, as we say, the Chinese economy matters. It's a massive economy. And also it matters because, as you mentioned earlier, in the geopolitical competition intensifies. So in what way China will move around how to handle its relationship with, for example, the United States, is also draws attention, from the people around the world.
So a lot of things you listed there that we need to keep under our radar. We need to keep a close eye on what will be Premier Li Qiang's first government work report, which will include, as you've mentioned, various China's economic strategies, perhaps a wide range of stimulus package. And there's also, of course, a growth target, which we'll discuss more in detail in our next question. And there's also a wave of attention, I hear, to China's population policy to tackle China's growing demographic challenges of low birth rate and aging society. And above all, pundits also say that the sessions will be a chance for President Xi to further solidify his one-man reign over the country as China's most powerful leader in generations. Now, to you, Professor Song, as Xu Qinduo has alluded to, China will set its economic growth target for this year during the big gathering, a number that the world awaits the most. Now, major international organizations, including the IMF, the OECD, and the World Bank, projected China's growth to fall to the 4% range as the country is faced with a pile of domestic and external risks after a shaky post-COVID-19 recovery, that is. But as Professor Xu mentioned, Chinese analysts maintain that it will probably continue to aim for the 5% range. What's your take?
Yeah, I think because the outsiders has some pessimistic overview and the prospect of the Chinese growth rate is because of some fluctuation over the course of the recovery phase of the Chinese economic recovery, particularly during some COVID-19 outbreak in the year of 2020. There was no target was chosen at all. But however, in 2021, they have reached 8.4%. And then in the year of 2022, maybe because of the deepening war concern between Ukraine and Russia, but Chinese economic growth rate has been dropped to 2.5%, which is turns out to be really disappointment, even though Chinese government has set up the target at around 5.5%. And because of that, in the year of 2023, they have actually defied the outside foreigners' estimation about 5%, because the Chinese economy has reached 5.2%. That's why the current Chinese government would like to most likely to set up as a target of economic growth rate at 5 percentage points. The primary reason behind this is because of the self-reliance and some new productive forces are emphasized by the Xi Jinping, the secretary of the Communist Party. And this is also mentioned particularly a week ago in the Politburo Standing Committee has emphasized some new path-breaking economic policy. So to that regard, we may expect some very strong fiscal policy, but Chinese Politburo as committee has clearly emphasized the stabilization of economy is the primary goal of the current the government of China.
A 5% range GDP growth is actually China's lowest level since 1991, which is when the Chinese government started announcing its growth target. So, so obviously President Xi is under a lot of pressure to prevent China's growth from further slipping down. And it appears it'll be crucial for President Xi to present confidence throughout the meeting. So we don't know for sure yet if China will continue to shoot high and aim for the 5% range, but we will definitely have to keep close tabs on that. Now, staying with you, Professor Song, now, what's gaining as much spotlight as China's growth target is whether various stimulus measures will be announced to jumpstart the country's sluggish domestic economy. China is suffering from weak spending, a plunge in foreign investment, while its property market slide is worsening. Do you expect some drastic stimulus package from the Chinese government?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, there is some kind of conflicting view about the prospect of the Chinese economy. But clearly, the Politburo has emphasized the stabilization economy despite some very relaxed monetary policy. Even they have reduced the mortgage rate of interest to support the property market in the particular, as you mentioned, in the real estate market. But however, as I learned that the Chinese Communist Party, they are very interested and focused on the new productive forces, which means that some fruit of the economic growth should reach the people and shared among the people, and then new innovative approach is necessary. So as long as this part is emphasized, it means there is not strong fiscal policy will be adopted or employed by the Communist Party. So I do not expect to set up the performance of growth rate is bigger. But as you mentioned, that since 1991, this would be the lowest target of economic GDP growth rate. But the size of the economy, as Professor Dr. Su has mentioned earlier, second largest economy in the world, it means necessarily the growth rate of GDP will be declining. That is natural. That is diminishing marginal return of capital investment is unavoidable path for every country. So to that regard, still 5% target is very ambitious, I think, but considering the current situation, as long as the surrounding economic environment and the geopolitical issues could be resolved in a relatively stable way, then Chinese economy could achieve that.
Now, I want to zoom in on China's diplomatic front. China's former foreign minister, Qin resigned last summer after a long, a rather mysterious absence from public view. And many expect that Liu Jianchao, minister of the Communist Party's International Liaison Department, will be tapped as Qin's successor. Professor Xu, who is this man, and do you also expect him to be appointed?
I do agree with this let's say expectation basically of experts who follow the Chinese diplomatic front, both internally and externally. Mr. Liu is currently basically you can see him as the foreign minister of the CPC, the Chinese Communist Party, the ruling party in China. He's the head of the International Liaison Department of the CPC. So basically, foreign minister of the CPC in a sense. But of course, it had different roles from the foreign minister of the nation. Previously, the head of international department is mostly about the relationship with other communist parties in Vietnam, for example, in Laos, in Cuba, etc. But now, and his, let's say, leadership, he has basically expanded the sphere of let's say, contact with basically ministers from other countries beyond the socialist countries. And secondly, I want to let your audience know that his background is also foreign affairs. He came from the foreign ministry. He used to be the spokesperson of the foreign ministry, and he used to be the director general of the information department of the Chinese foreign ministry. And then he went on to become the ambassador to Manila and Indonesia, so for years. So he has some always rich experience in this arena, and also he worked later on as important assistant to President Xi Jinping in terms of fighting corruption, especially cracking down on those escaping to overseas to other countries, foxhound operation. He demonstrated this, sophisticated skills in terms of negotiation with other countries to bring them back to China. So that's the expectation. He speaks fluent English. He has a manner of let's say, very friendly, with a friendly style in terms of communication. And he understands the Chinese, obviously Chinese situation. He understands the foreign policy, the diplomacy. So many people see him as the right person to be in that position, guiding the Chinese foreign policy, for the years and the years ahead.
You just mentioned that Mr. Liu Jianchao is a bit more friendly. So would you say, if he's named, that would signal the end of China's wolf warrior diplomacy? That's largely characterized as quite confrontational and pugnacious, if you will.
That's an interesting question, of course. A lot of people have this question, about the Chinese wolf warrior diplomacy. Is really characterized by a couple of the Chinese diplomats, who speaks probably strongly in terms of tone, in terms of words they use. But if you look at the Chinese foreign policy, it remains unchanged. That is, China, as Mr. Liu said earlier, not long ago, actually, in the United States, China does not seek to change this current international order, nor does China, try to rewrite the international order. Because China was one of the founder, is one of the founder of the current international order, and China is seen as the country which benefits the most from the current international order. But at the same time, I have to point out, for China has its own national interests. For example, sovereignty and territorial integrity over Taiwan, etc. I mean, that's probably any nation will defend their this very core interest, territorial integrity, sovereignty issues. But beyond that, China has been trying to basically make friends with every country. China does not need any enemies, even in the United States. China wants to maintain a stable and friendly relationship with the U.S., with the West, with Korea, with Japan, with any other countries. Despite the differences, in political system, in culture, yes, there are differences, but it's really about how to handle them, and then we can continue with the globalization, with free trade, with more investment, so every country could benefit from the process.
And speaking of which, what kind of message do you expect from China to the U.S.?
Well, it's a good question. Since last November, the summit in San Francisco between President Xi Jinping and President Biden, the relationship has been stabilizing. What we are seeing is groups from the two countries, both governmental officials or non-governmental groups. They are meeting each other quite frequently, either in Washington or in Beijing. They are working on specific issues in trade, in finance, or in this, let's say, people-to-people exchanges areas. So we are seeing better communication, better consultation, including the opening of channel between the two militaries. For the sake of avoiding the worst scenario, of military conflict or even a war between the two nuclear powers. That's something unthinkable, unimaginable. So as two responsible powers, they have to do something to avoid that kind of scenario. That probably would be the end of the world. So it seems to me that they are trying to, let's say, to work together in where we can. At the same time, from the Chinese point of view, to strengthen the relationship, to bring, as the presidency promised, to invite 50,000 young Americans to come to China to study, 5 years starting from 2024. I think that's an important step. That's an important signal from China in terms of what kind of relationship China wants to have with Washington.
Now, going back to Professor Song, going back to where we left off, if China unveils a set of stimulus measures to boost its growth, do you expect that to help Korea's exports to China? Do you expect that to push up Korea's falling exports to China? We're a little pressed on time, so if you could mention just briefly.
Okay, so recently, for the past 4 months, and the Korean export to China has been on the path to recovery. And because of the January effect and the calendar effect, we have seen in the January 2024, we have observed that there's a clear rebound. But the future is rests upon whether the current our South Korean government's policy and diplomacy policy should determine the prospect of the export to China. For the past several decades, China is one of the largest exports from Korea. So South Korea government should not lose this kind of very promising market at all. And as long as Chinese government is on the recovery path, then we must make the most use of that situation.
All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us and sharing your valuable insights.
Thank you for inviting me.
Having me.
And that brings us to the end of this show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.